Europe only takes up 2% of the world's surface. However, it has changed the entire globe. While the European empires believed they would hold onto their claim forever, they fell. Nationalist movements rose across the globe, and the old powers were unable to stop it. So in this video, I'll try to theorize, what if European imperialism never ended? But first, some history. If you want to skip straight to the scenario, click here. What was the main factor that ended the European empires? The World Wars. Imperialism was an idea that encompassed the entire Western world, and a fragile one. World War I and II were the main factors to the fall of Europe's empires, not only because it caused so much destruction at home, but because it shattered an illusion which persisted for centuries. The idea that empire was a noble good. Today, an empire is an accusation, a derogatory term. If somebody accused America of being an empire back in the 19th century, it wouldn't be an insult, but a compliment. A nation's strength and prowess was determined by holdings across the globe. But the illusion didn't fully begin to collapse until World War II. The fascists of Japan, Germany, and Italy took the idea of empire to the extreme. The racism and brutality of the Nazis scarred Europe, and to the Allies brought the hypocrisy of empire to the spotlight. Eugenics and ideas of European superiority were popular before the war, but were shattered by Hitler taking it up to 11. Empire became disheartened. In Asia, Japan had conquered old colonies like Indonesia and Vietnam. Not only did this show Europe couldn't protect their own interests, but it gave natives time to create their own nationalist movements like Ho Chi Minh. Their age had begun to show, and new players were taking their place. World War II elevated the USSR and USA to superpower status, and Europe was literally stuck in the middle. Over the next few decades, new countries would pop up across Asia and Africa. Europe's military dominance was over. So what if European imperialism never ended? The reason why Europe's dominance lasted as long as it did was because of its military advantage, using the leap in technology to get an advantage on the African and Asians, which allowed Europe to create an imbalance of power. The natives were unable to fight back efficiently, as they didn't have the technology to do so. This is why empire felt like such a natural status for Europe. There was very little loss of life when taking these lands, at least for them, creating a positive image back at home. I feel in this alternate timeline, the concept of a global empire could become weaker if this technological gap between colonizer and native begins to close. As new weapons like assault rifles would be invented, a single African or Asian soldier would have the capability to cause far more damage to the Europeans. This means that if a rebellion occurred somewhere, it would be more costly for the Europeans to maintain authority. Of course, Europe would advance as well, creating more powerful planes, guns, and bombs to silence any revolution. In this alternate timeline, plenty of riots and rebellions would be stopped, full-scale conflicts used to shut down rebels. Europe would be successful at first, but Africa and Asia would still remain colonized and resentful. As the century would go on, the weapons become deadlier, the rebellion and violence become larger. More natives would die brutally, and more soldiers would die trying to quell the rebellion. With television bringing the images of the violence back into the homes of Europe, some would certainly begin to question what is the point of the bloodshed. Since the Africans and Asians wouldn't accept European occupation, this constant rebellion would only get worse. In this alternate timeline, Europe's empires would have eventually ended, at least in the traditional sense, decades later than in our timeline. It would have been too draining, even at full strength, to fight off constant rebellion. Without the world wars, the culture of empire would have lasted well into the late 20th century, but would have been disillusioned after constant rebellion and attack. Look at Algeria, Indonesia, and Vietnam in our timeline as examples. It would have always been a losing fight. In this alternate timeline, Europe's empires would be mostly dissolved. However, their relationship would still remain dominant over their former colonies. The imperialism still would have lasted, just like in our timeline. The Commonwealth of Nations, Commonwealth of Independent States, all remnants of former empires. In this alternate timeline, just like in our own, decolonization would still occur, but the influence would never end. Empire died because it was no longer worth it. The economic benefit of these regions in this alternate timeline would be just like in our own. Private enterprise and dealing with native leaders would take its place. Western companies would still use cheap labor from Africa and Asia. Don't take what I'm saying as political, this is simply the reality. In our timeline, Europe's imperial ambitions forever shaped humanity, and has changed the history of mankind forever, both in positive and negative ways. So in the factor of colonization, our timeline and this alternate timeline would not be too different. However, this is just one scenario, so what do you think would have happened had Europe imperialism never ended? Say in the comments. This video idea was suggested by Patreon contributor James Upton. Thanks James for your support. As for the rest, like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.